Hi, my name is Craig. Welcome to the panel called Throes, and I'm not your moderator. But I'm going to ask us all, our distinguished panel of writers up here, to introduce themselves. Dwayne?
My name is Dwayne Clayton. I'm a paramedic, have been for a number of years, started my career as a police officer. So I guess, fortunately, unfortunately, I have been around lots of death for a number of years.
Hi, I'm Melodie Campbell. I'm the Executive Director of Crime Writers of Canada and the author of 2 series. I'm not sure which one I'm here for right now, so I have fantasy series and I also have a mob crime series. But I'm also a former hospital director, so I've been in the emergency room a lot too.
Do people die in both your genres?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, then you're in the right place.
Yes, they die very differently, though, in those genres.
My name is Craig DiLouie. I'm a horror and fantasy author. Most of my books are in the horror realm. Cut my teeth with zombie fiction, where I'm an expert on death and on death. There's a very high body count in my books, and my latest book, Suffer the Children, which is a modern twist on vampires. It's an apocalyptic story, very heart-wrenching, and that came out from Simon & Schuster earlier this year in May.
I'm Axel Howerton. I have been known for horrific things, and mostly as a crime writer. I run a online horror event in October. It's called Coffin Hop, which has had upwards of 400 writers and artists involved. I have also spent a lot of time in emergency rooms, but it's because I am an unsavory character, much like my own characters that I create.
Yeah, I should point out I write about horror, so I don't have to think about the stuff that Dwayne does for a living. Yes. What would you say are the most important 3 elements of a compelling death scene in a novel?
Three components. That might be a bit of a challenge. I'll think about that, and I'll just talk on for a second. I think one of the things you have to know what it is you're writing, what the audience you're writing to. So if you asked me for a description of a death scene, I would give you probably a very actual, the way it probably would happen. That may or may not be good fiction. So Hollywood has taken death scenes to the nth degree. So everything is spectacular, everything is fantastic. That's not really what happens in real life. Just as an example, not necessarily a death scene, a police officer who is shot, who's wearing a ballistic vest, will not go flying back into the wall and through the wall into the other room. That shot is about the same as if it's less than a fastball coming back at a pitcher. So, they catch the ball, they don't go flying into the outfield because they caught the ball, their arm goes back. So I guess what I'm saying is you have to decide where you're at with your story. Are you writing a true-to-life police mystery, or are you writing about a world that has other rules? And if it has other rules, then it's wide open. I don't know if I directly answered your question.
That's great. Maybe 3 is ambitious. Let's start with 1.
Yeah.
So what would you say is an important? Hey you.
Okay, hey me.
What would you say is? You're not getting off the hook.
Yeah.
What would you say is an important, very important element of an effective death scene?
Okay, well, just talking from my former background, it's got to be real. You got to know how people die. And it absolutely drives me nuts, and I'm sure it does you too. When people have this long soliloquy they've been gut shot and they're going to have this long soliloquy, and then their head goes to the side and their eyes close. And somebody kisses them goodbye. That's not the way it happens. Now, in my world, I'm going to talk about the fantasy series because that's the most violent of my stuff, sword and sorcery fantasy. And in there, I have medieval battle scenes. I had to do it in the 3rd book in the series. I actually had to get that violent. And so the research I did into Viking warfare, into Celtic armor and weapons, and what the weapon does to you, and what happens on the battlefield. They left no wounded on the battlefield. They killed everybody because the last thing they wanted is somebody sneaking up behind them afterwards. So things like that. When I read, and I obviously read a lot too, I've got to know that you've done your research in how somebody actually dies, or it doesn't work for me.
I'm going to take a different tack. To me, because of what everybody's discussed here, that realism is so important, and in real life it happens in a heartbeat. And, you shoot somebody, they drop, they're done. So to me, the most important element of those death scenes is the tension leading up to it, so that you're building that scene, and then when that moment hits, if you're going to make it realistic, they're not going to have the 3-page soliloquy, they're just going to drop, make it count.
Yeah, now I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think that realism is extremely important, especially with the kind of books I write, like especially my zombie fiction. So you're dealing with zombies, so you have all these zombies getting shot, and the people are getting are dying. It has to be. It's fantastic, right? I mean, we don't actually think zombies are real, although some people do. They ask me where my bug out bag is and where what's in it, and I'm like, zombies aren't real, right? But thanks. I guess that's a compliment. If you read the book, you think they're real. But people, you have to make it as realistic as possible. The more realistic you make your story in general, the more fantastic yet believable the monsters will be that you choose to inhabit it. If you're doing something like horror, so I like a realistic death. I also like death where the character is not like. Sometimes it's great if they try and do something heroic, or they can do one like famous last words. But a lot of times they're just terrified, and they're upset, and they're angry, and they're in shock. And to me, that makes the death have so much more pathos than them saying, "I always loved you," But instead they're like, "Oh God, where I can't see, and I'm afraid." And that's so much scarier, and because we're all afraid, and so we can really empathize with a death like that, because it's like, wow, that's really powerful stuff.
The trope I want to completely crash in my next book is the one where you're holding the gun on the guy, and instead of killing him, you're going to tell him for 5 minutes why you're doing this. I swear the next book I'm going to write, the gun's going to come out, and I'm going to go bang, and the guy's going to fall and say, "But you didn't tell me why you were doing all this."
Why would I do that? You bet.
Yes.
The best scene in Austin Powers. Oh. I got a gun in my room. I'll go get it. Bam, he's gone. Yeah. I'm just going to put him behind this wall and not watch.
Yeah.
And Indiana Jones in the sword fight.
Exactly. So
yeah, which was an accident, but it was actually one of the most brilliant, realistic things in the movie. Here's a second question: are there any hard and fast rules you would advise other writers about, say, the timing of a death? Could you introduce a character and kill them in the first 10 pages if it wasn't, say, a mystery? If it was just a regular story? Or is there anything, or are there any particular do's and don'ts that come to mind when it comes to when a character should die, or otherwise how a character should die?
Well, I can speak to crime fiction and to, say, epic fantasy. The rule in epic fantasy is if you kill off one of your protagonists, because quite often you'll have 3 maybe, if you do that, it must be heroic. They must die heroically. However, Game of Thrones has totally thrown that on its head, and it had fantasy fans just furious with the death of Ned in the first season there. And I think we're seeing a swing now, so I think more is going to be allowed in that. In crime fiction, yes, definitely. I mean, most of my books start off with a body. The thing is, if you're going to introduce a character and you want us to like the character, do not kill them off in the first 30 pages. Okay, you'll lose your audience in crime fiction if you do that.
I got to go back and rewrite my first 30 pages. I think it's probably page 50, but I do have a character who dies, but it's a heroic death. Just coming from the mystery slush, I mean, the panel was saying something has to happen on the first page. I'm not saying you have to kill somebody on the first page, but you have to be setting something up on the first page, and it may very well be that somebody is dead on the first page. If it's the first page, though, you're not really attached to them. They're the cannon fodder, and that's setting up the story. I think it is more difficult the farther on you get. But at one point, I did a body count in the novel I was writing, and I went back and had fewer dead because it was tough one-upping myself with so many deaths. So I think you have to be careful about the number of them. I also think, though, that if people are upset with you killing off a major character or a character they liked, it's kind of the idea of there's no such thing as bad press. And in Pirates of the Caribbean, Jack Sparrow did when he was told, well, you're the worst pirate I've ever heard of, but you have heard of me. Yes. So you know what? If you've got people talking about your novel, and that means they're into it. So I kind of think that's a good thing.
You know, obviously, if you're going to do it right at the beginning, it's either got to be somebody that's, you know, collateral damage, and that's what it's there for. It's part of the plot. It's not, you know, a character assassination. Unless it's a character that you've already established somewhere else, and then, you know, you're pulling a Walter Mosley, and that can be effective. I don't think there's really any rules anywhere in fiction that can't be bent or broken if you do it the right way.
That's an excellent point. I mean, note that any time, first of all, you should know the rules.
Except the Oxford comma.
Yeah.
Yeah. Always know the rules so you can break them, and if you bend or break the rules, just be aware that even if you do it really well, there are still risks.
Yes.
And don't be mad if, you know, most fiction's written in past tense. My zombie books were written in present tense, and the reason why I did that is because I wanted the terror to feel immediate. Like I didn't want you to think this happened in the past and everybody survived. That I wanted it to be present tense so that it felt immediate that you don't know if these people are going to survive within the next 5 to 10 pages. Any of them. Nothing is sacred. And that's one of the wonderful things I think about all the deaths in George R. R. Martin's work is that nothing is sacred, and so everything has higher stakes. Every time there's something, it's not like, oh well, she's gonna live. It's like, well, maybe not. And so it's just like real life. There's much higher stakes, and it makes the book a much tenser experience and a much more visceral experience. But when I wrote it, my point about the present tense is when I wrote those zombie books in present tense, I thought I was doing a good thing. A lot of people liked that, but some people absolutely hated it. And I got 1-star reviews on Amazon because they downloaded the Kindle sample and said, "I don't like present tense. 1 star. I hate you." And that was pretty much it. Which you know. Speaking of death, you know, that's how writers suffer death by 1,000 cuts, right? Is when trolls do stuff like that. But you know, it's just part of the business. You just live with it. But then you look at your total star average, and you're like, oh God.
And that's when you want to kill somebody.
Why? I'm writing that guy into my next book.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know about you,
Freddie from Indianapolis.
But my zombie book, I got a lot of. That doesn't follow the specific George Romero rules of zombieism, so this isn't a zombie book.
I think that's
1
important.
star.
Yeah, I think it's important that you know the conventions in your genre.
Yeah.
Because I like to call them expectations. People who read a whodunit have certain expectations.
Right.
One of them will be that you will know who did it by the end of the book. And if you don't satisfy that, then you're going to get very unhappy readers.
Yeah, which is why probably bending is always safer than breaking. Right?
Yes.
When it comes to the rules.
Until it's your 10th book, and then maybe you can get away with more.
Yeah.
I think the first...
Once you got them hooked and they're your big fans, yeah, absolutely.
And
but even then you
publishers.
can make people upset, like The Wire. You know, when there was a key character everyone was in love with, right? And he gets shot and killed. The Wire was sort of my model for my zombie fiction, which is anything could happen at any time, and it just happens because that's the way it happens. And there's not big lead up. There's no cue the sappy music, now feel something, and this thing's going to happen because I'm going to think and feel for you, reader, because I'm the writer, and I really want you to feel this way. So, And no, it's just like stuff happens and bang, you're left with the wreckage and the aftermath of that emotionally. And if I've done my job properly, you care about that character enough that that's shocking and that's upsetting and that's, wow, that's powerful. Just like The Wire, when there's a character who's sort of the Robin Hood of the neighborhood. He steals from the drug dealers and gives, I think he keeps it. But he steals, so he's not quite a Robin Hood. He's more like he just steals it. Yeah. He's just Robin.
Yeah.
But he's such a great character. First of all, because he's gay, so he's sort of like this tough guy in the hood and fearless, and the kids all run around saying he's coming. Like this guy is known, okay, and that something terrible is gonna happen whenever he shows up, and he declares war on this gang, and then he just gets, Anybody here object to me? I didn't say the guy's name. Maybe it's okay if I can reveal.
Oh, you're doing a spoiler.
I'm just spoiler. Anybody is okay? Anybody object? Okay. So he walks into a convenience store to get a pack of cigarettes and gets shot in the head by a kid. And it's just like the greatest scene. You're like, what? He just like, what? This guy is just waging this holy war against the most ruthless gang in Baltimore, and he's just this one guy, and he's like larger than life, and you fell in love with him as a character, and all of a sudden, some 10-year-old kid wanted to be a big shot hero, and just pops him in the head in a grocery store while he's buying a pack of cigarettes. It's just like a Jesse James kind of death, and it was just absolutely awesome. But anyway, next question. Do you guys approach differently, like when, say, a good guy versus a bad guy dies? Or do you think they should die differently, or do you treat that differently in any way?
Well, like Melodie had said before, if it's
I'm throwing easy ones.
Yeah.
in fantasy, obviously the villains don't need to die heroically necessarily, but in a lot of, especially genre fiction, your hero has to die a heroic death. They can't go out like Elvis. They can't, just trip on something and fall in a well. It has to have meaning to validate that character's previous existence. And when it's villains, usually you want to make it kind of a death of retribution, where everything awful that you've seen them do through the rest of the narrative, there's their payback.
So does death require like a sense of justice?
I think so.
Yeah.
Certainly in mystery fiction, that is the basis of it. In mystery fiction, a lot of readers and writers look at it from the point of view of this is justice, not the law. Sometimes the law doesn't give us justice. And so this is what we get from our mystery fiction. We can make it end so that the right thing happens at the end. And it may not be the legal thing that happens.
Do you ever write a fiction where an antagonist dies and the reader feels sad?
Oh yeah.
The reader feels sad?
Oh yeah. Particularly in my fantasy fiction, I've gotten some quite angry emails that I took out characters that people were becoming really fond of, because when I write villains, they have a soft side too to them. So some people link that way, and yeah. There was something that you mentioned that I wanted to point out, because you had said about they want you to start with a bang. One of the ways we can get around that, certainly in mystery fiction, because usually we work up to the body, but one of the things I did in a whodunit that came out a couple of years ago, A Purse to Die For, is I started at the murder. I started at the heroine coming across the body of the murdered victim. And then the next page was 4 days earlier. So that's a device. You don't want to do it all the time, but occasionally you can do that to set it up so that everybody knows right from the start that this is going to be a rather shocking whodunit.
I think on your question of dying honorably and if there's a difference between antagonist and protagonist, I think one of the ways you can show that too is what happens after they've died. So, real life example was a police shootout where the bad guy is shot, is dead, and a police officer is seriously injured. The expectations of all the police officers on the scene, of the paramedics, was, we're pretty sure the bad guy's dead. We don't even want you checking and touching. We have one of our own down, and that is your only focus. And when you're surrounded by a whole bunch of angry police officers. They're not angry at you, but you feel the tension in the scene. So I guess what I'm saying is, if that had been reversed and the police officer was dead and the bad guy was still alive, that would have been a really hard decision on what we would have done. So fortunately it wasn't that way. But I mean, we would have been forced to work hard on the police officer who was dead. So I guess what I'm saying is, whether you have paramedics, doctors, nurses, you're near a hospital or whatever, you can also show how important the person was by what happens to them after they've died.
And it doesn't have to be, that's your world, first responders, but it could just be anybody. It could be relatives. In fact, the criminal who did that terrible thing may have, mother.
Yep.
Who's going to be upset. I mean, I don't, if that's relevant to bring in, but it may not be relevant to bring in, but it might be, and that could be effective in a story. But anyway, everything has ripples. Everything that happens is a cause that has an effect, and so the death is an effect of a previous cause, but the death itself can become a cause of some other, a lot of other effects, and it can give the death a lot more meaning, like you said, by how other people react to it or how the world's a little bit different.
I love that. You're great at feeding the perfect lead-ins for
that was a
for
brilliant
books. I
observation
just thinking that because I just realized that I did just what you said. I killed off somebody that people aren't going to be happy about at the end of this book here. One of the Vikings gets killed off, but they are going to give him a big Viking send-off with the ship and everything in the end, and to show how important this is and so it's interesting.
To recognize that I take it he was a bad guy.
Well, my bad guys are, it depends on your point of view. The
Right.
Vikings would consider him a good guy. But it's a Viking invasion of Saxon England, so, an alt world.
So they would give him absolutely. And
Yeah.
they would probably honor, if he was a bad guy, he wasn't all bad. I guess.
No,
And so
not at all. And people are going to be
It would remind you as a reader
upset.
that this person
Yeah.
actually had some good traits.
Yeah.
Right?
And 9 times out of 10, especially in mystery and crime fiction, if you think about it, the antagonist dies, the bad guy's gone. That's pretty much the last you hear of them. It's over. They're just gone. They're not in the story anymore, right? If the good guy's hurt, somebody else that's a secondary character that you should be fond of dies, that carries weight through usually to the end of the book, but at least for a few pages.
Right. But like any oh god, I was gonna bring up another really good example, but it would have a huge spoiler. Anybody see True Detective?
Yes.
Isn't that great? The way it ended, but there was
I haven't seen the way it ended, so don't tell me. I missed the last one.
when the house does the. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. It was actually a bus, not a house. No, I'm kidding about that. Anyway, here's another question for you guys. And what's your in your own fiction, or if you can't think of a good example, maybe in a movie or some other fiction, what was your favorite death scene and why? Dwayne, go. Notice I'm not answering these first.
Yeah, that's a good setup. Buy yourself time. I got nothing right now.
What do you think?
Okay, well, in my own fiction, I would say in my first book, I have one of the sort of good guys take out one of the bad guys with a single blow to the neck with a broadsword. The research I did into broadswords to see what would be necessary to do that and what would actually happen. I'm really proud of that scene. However, it has absolutely shocked the audience of my books because they don't expect that in comic fantasy.
I guess mine, just because of the outlandishness of it, my zombie novella, an old cowboy is the last one left, hiding in the kitchen of a greasy diner, and is just waiting to be set upon by a zombified white tiger in Las Vegas. It happens all the time. We just don't hear about it. The press covers it up.
For me, I guess in my zombie books, I have lots of favorites. People getting overrun by crowds of zombies and getting torn to shreds. the zombies themselves getting shot by military forces. There's such a high body count. It's really hard to pick the one that I like the most. They're all so good. But I would say that my favorite death-related scene would be in this novel, Suffer the Children. In this novel, there's a disease where all the world's children need blood to they need blood to continue surviving as the children they are, and the parents have to give it to them. So the kids are vampires, but essentially the monsters in the book are actually the parents who become monsters out of love. They have to get more and more blood for their kids to keep them alive, and there's only so much to go around. So as the blood supply wanes, the last source of blood will be each other. And so the operating theme of the book is, how far would you go for someone you love? And at what point does we'd all, as parents, I think we all say, we put our arms in a shredder for our kids, but would you put someone else's arm in a shredder, right? And how many people's arms would you put in a shredder? And that's where love and sacrifice become horror, and it's a very uncomfortable read as a result, because it holds up a mirror to the soul as well as just tells a story. But my favorite scene, death-related scene in it, is the disease is called Herod syndrome, so named for the Israelite monarch that killed all the firstborn of Bethlehem. And Herod syndrome starts by basically killing all the world's children, and then they come back, and that's when they need blood as vampires. And if they're given blood, they become exactly like the children they were for a short time. But there's a scene where in horror, you have to introduce a normal, then you have the horror element, and then you have the new normal. And so in the normal of the book, you're introduced to a number of characters. One of them is this woman named Joan, and she loves her kids, and she's spending all this time with them, and they're hilarious, they're frustrating, they're all the things that kids are, and she's feeling the full gamut of emotions, from frustration to joy to love at being with her children, but she just needs some time away. And so she goes to the movies with her friends. She's going to see a spy thriller, and by now, as the reader, you know that there's this horrific thing going right outside the movie theater where kids are basically having strokes and dying. And it's not gruesome, it's not grisly, but the fact of it is so scary and uncomfortable that that's all you need as the reader to be, wow. And then the lights come up in the theater, people's cell phones are going off, and she's like, let me watch the movie, please. Is this some false alarm? And then she calls her husband, and her husband says that, our kids are gone, and I couldn't save them. And she keeps asking him to repeat himself and say, no, I'm coming home. Just tell me the kids are okay. And he keeps saying, no, they're gone. And she's never heard that tone in his voice before. And she eventually just screams, and her friend tries to calm her. She just beats at her friend, runs up halfway up the aisle, and passes out. And that's the scene. And it's so disturbing to me and it's my favorite scene and death-related scene, because all the scary and horrible stuff actually happened off camera. But now all we have is a mother who's just trying to watch a movie and missed it all. And now she's hearing about it on the phone, and it overloads her circuits. And it's just such an upsetting scene for that reason.
That's a really good point you're leading into there, is what do you keep off camera, and really, where is the tension? Is the tension in actually seeing it play out before you, or is the tension in thinking what can happen? And I think sometimes the reader's imagination can be better than anything we can write if you can set it up of what they can be imagining happening.
And it also ties into the important point Dwayne was making, that deaths are not just effects but causes and have ripples, and sometimes it's the reaction of people we empathize with that makes the death actually have a lot more meaning and be twice or 10 times more horrible, because we are now giving a reaction to the death is now being given a human face in the story. One
of the ways that I play with, I've just thought of this now, wouldn't you know it, after the fact. One of the ways I play with that is in this book here in Rowena. They are losing the battle. Okay, they're the Saxons. They are going to lose alt-world England to the Vikings. And they bring her the shield of her cousin John, who were leading the troops to the south. Now, you all know what that means. If they bring you a shield, the whole Spartan thing of, return with your shield or return on it. She knows then that they will lose the battle. I've thrown conventions on their head in fantasy because they will not win at the end of this, and she knows it now. I could have shown that scene of him being killed, but I didn't. Instead, I show all the reaction of the people there learning when they see this busted up shield coming.
Yeah, and I think that's valid, and especially it really depends on the emotional attachment you've built up for that character in the first place. That's a character that you've well established, that you have an emotional connection with, so you can take it off scene and not even mention the death until it's already happened, and then here's the aftermath. And that'll resonate with the audience regardless of whether you show them, whether you see Ned Stark's head come off or you're his child hearing about it, 3 days later. If it's a character that you're not so emotionally attached to, or especially if it's a character that you're supposed to despise, you want to see that. Again, it speaks to that retribution factor where you want to see that end of that awful person. You want to see the actual moment that terrible situation is going to end, and that everything's going to be okay because that bad guy is gone. So it all depends on what's going to work best.
You want to see the head roll. That's exactly, I did
Unless
exactly
you're
that.
one of the
You
Stark
saw the
kids.
head roll on the ground.
What about the guy who cut his head off? Okay, this is probably our hero or a protagonist in the story. Cuts off the head of the villain, and and walks away and says he lives happily ever after. Like, as far as effects go of death, if I cause a death, if this could be the worst person, this could be Hitler, and I could kill Hitler, I'd still feel bad. I killed another human being. Why don't we see more of that? How come we don't see these mighty heroes like Conan have PTSD or some kind of remorse, over killing so many people?
Well, I think you probably do. Certainly in fantasy fiction, you do see that. But I think then it depends whether you're writing black and white or gray, and I write very gray.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I like reading, I like writing.
Yeah. By that, we simply mean that our heroes are flawed. And maybe our villains aren't all bad. And by the end of the second book that I wrote, everybody was cheering for the villain. I got very surprised.
I think, though, as well, with PTSD, when you grow up with something, that is the normal. So if you have set, maybe your series where the war has been going on for 10, 15, 20 years, and that is the normal way of life, and your cousin goes out and doesn't come back or comes back on the shield, and now it's your turn to go, that's a normal way of life. What causes the PTSD is the thing that is different from normal. So I think there's lots of examples of that. Look in some of the war-torn countries, the child soldiers, that's all they know, and they're hardened at the age of 10, and.
Right, but they're pretty messed up.
Absolutely.
But maybe they don't feel remorse.
It's normal. The death is normal.
So would
which is
you
a shame.
say that it's maybe less of a requirement in something more realistic as your work than say in fantasy or horror, where you don't have to necessarily show that emotional wave in every character that something like that happens to? Like, I mean, you're dealing with police officers that are, in the middle of violence all the time. That kind of thing happens all the time. Yeah. Bad guys get shot.
Yeah, but a police officer shooting somebody, they have to be psychiatrically evaluated for this very reason, right?
Oh, yeah.
In reality, telling that story, do you feel like you need to show that emotional scarring for the reader?
Well, yeah, I guess I did, because somebody said yesterday about abusing the protagonist. So, yeah, in my story, his partner gets shot and dies. And if I was to pick now the death scene, he's in a dark highway at midnight doing CPR, hoping that somebody is coming. Mm-hmm. And so he has his choice then is, does he continue with this job or does he leave, and how far down is he going to go before he rebounds? So I think, again, at the beginning I said, what is it you're writing and where you're going, because that is going to make a difference.
Yeah, it made me think of the onion field, right?
Oh yeah,
The bad guys get the drop on the cops and put down your gun, or your partner's going to get it, and he puts down his gun, and then his partner gets it anyway, and he ends up damaged for the rest of his life. In horror, it's the exact same thing. It's you see these books where people are running around. It's like, oh, all my friends and family are zombies now. Oh, too bad. Get some. And I'm kind of like, well, they may be a monster, but they're wearing the face of a loved one, and I don't think it would be that easy. And I certainly would think twice, and I'd actually feel really bad. Maybe if they were undead, it's different. You're putting something down that's a corpse. But if they're more like a rage virus type of scenario, they're still a living thing, and maybe there's some of their consciousness still in there. And in any case, they would look like the person I love, and I would feel horrible about doing it.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason that kind of genre fiction gets so marginalized and kind of rejected by certain groups of people, because they can't see how that could be a reality, that somebody would just, the world just changed, everybody I know is dead, but I'm going to go kick some ass, so I'm going to go collect some guns. And
branch of zombie
there's
fiction.
There's this missing emotional element that I think ostracizes the main populace, shall we say, and then there's always going to be people that like any little subgenre.
See, I think it's actually a little bit of an age divide. I find that the two types of zombie fiction, and the very young crowd, they don't have a lot to lose in life, and so for them it's more wish fulfillment.
Absolutely.
The apocalypse, to be last man standing, and they think it would be an exciting adventure, and that some of these people actually kind of long for it. And then the older crowd is like, well, I have a house and I've lived and I have a family and I have so much to lose. My stakes are entirely different. So the apocalypse is something that really scares me rather than something that's more thrilling.
Yeah, and I think that maturity is reflected in all readers. Your maturity level's kind of going to dictate what you're reading. You're not reading Alice Munro when you're 16. Most people.
Yeah.
Unless they make us.
The same with watching television. There's going to be a lot more 20-year-olds watching Walking Dead for the zombie scenes,
right,
than there are for the
the drama,
familiar scenes where you're worrying about the dad and his kid.
Yeah.
You got me thinking about something there when you mentioned television, because what I have experienced is that on television we are willing to accept things that are a little more unlikely to happen. In your fiction, the readers will storm your website if you do something that is incorrect, for instance. And particularly if you have nurses or doctors or paramedics reading your books, you'll hear about it if you write something that's incorrect. And in fact, I did want to say today that your best friend is an emergency room nurse or a doctor or a paramedic. As a writer, your best friend.
Yeah, when I was writing my book, I did a huge amount of research on blood, the human blood, and the effects of the human blood. You have to get everything, research everything. We asked some and answered very interesting answers. Thank you guys, fantastic. And we have about 10 minutes left, so I would like to open it up to questions from you guys. Yes, Constance.
Has there ever been a time, have you ever had a character, killed off the character, but then regret killing that character? And another one, have you ever had a character that was so annoying that you actually killed that character?
Oh, yeah. The first one for sure, because you write your first book not knowing it's going to be a series. I wrote my first Rowena Through the Wall, the first of the fantasy. I had no idea it was going to be a series. So I get to book 2 and I think, I just killed off my worst villain. Why can't I bring him back in book 2? And so then I thought about doing the demon thing. Yeah. And guess what? In book 3, we have demons.
Yeah, you'll just have to have him. He has a twin brother or something. Yeah.
That's great though when you write the standalone book that turns into a sequel and you're like, wow,
yeah.
oh dear, all those plot threads. I wrapped them up. I don't really have an answer to that. I had characters where I actually felt really sad I killed them, but they had to go. It was their time to go, and the character actually tells you it's my time to go, and but it's very but yeah, especially in this book, I was because I went on this journey with these people. I'm a parent, they're parents, and what they were trying to do, even though they lost, what they were trying to do, and even though what they ended up doing was evil. What they were trying to do was heroic and based on love, and I really felt for them. I really felt sorry for them, and so when the ones who died, it was hard for me actually.
Well, I'll admit, and it's an awful, cheesy, stupid writer thing to say, but I regret every character I've killed off, because you kill them off, and then there's still that little thread going in the back of your mind, and you're thinking of 12 other things that could have happened with them. And all those multiverses are opening up. But at the same time, like Craig said, there's a point that comes in the story where you just know that's your time. That's really, let's be honest, that's why we're writers, because we get to play God.
Yes.
That's right.
Glorious control. That's why I love this business, is we put the characters where we want. We kill them when we want them. They do what we wish. We could change them. We do all sorts of things.
And yet they also tell you, too, what they're going to do.
Yes.
It does take on a life of, it sounds all zen, and the book writes itself. But it's...
If only it wrote itself.
But it does to an extent, and the characters do tell you what they want to do, and sometimes they tell you it's their time to die. I think so.
Well, you're talking about motivation here, really, because you built a character and you built their personality, and from there you can tell how they would react in a situation. So you just create the situation, and the character will automatically act in a certain way because you have created a person.
That's right. I'm sorry, Dwayne, did you answer? No? Okay. Any other questions? Come on. Okay. Yes, Jan.
You talked a little bit about being factual and the importance of being realistic, but what if your readers don't realize that's realistic? Like you were saying with the sword, and you did all the research, and killing someone with a broadsword is probably different than what your readers expect it to be like.
It depends on the genre you're writing in. Of course, in fantasy, I have to be absolutely accurate, because some of these people will be military geeks and will know exactly, how heavy a broadsword is, and damn, it's heavy. They'll know how the damage that a longbow, an English longbow, will do, which is a hell of a lot of damage. If I'm writing in the romance market, if I'm crossing over to romance, I won't get that. But what I will get is a lot of nurses writing in if a fellow dies in 10 minutes after having a wound to the shoulder, for instance.
But it's actually a brilliant question, though, because what if the right way is what everybody thinks is wrong? Like what if there's a popular perception that's wrong? And like, for example, there's a lot of popular misperception about the value of CPR, that it can actually resuscitate you and bring you back to life. And in most cases, it's just keeping you alive until the paramedics can get there. Like, so what if you end up writing something that is actually totally realistic, but your readers all think you're getting it wrong because they're wrong?
Well, I can't do that because I have a hospital background, and I just can't not be real about these things. So what I do is I choose my method of death to fit what I need. And if I need somebody to die quickly, then I either have something which would be very common, is I either have a warrior twist the other guy's neck off. I mean, and instant death, or it's a sword to the heart, or it's the head off.
Well, I think it is a fine line, like anything with writing, because going back to what Dwayne had said originally about the taking a bullet in the vest, a lot of it too has to do with television and movies, and we're so inured with these images and these ideas of how these physics work. If you write a scene that way and he gets hit and he just kind of moves a little bit, he's okay, he's not down, people kind of go, I've seen that 8 million times on TV, and that's not how it works. So you kind of have to walk that line and, please that sensibility that everybody has, that, life is action, at the same time make sure that you're not going to get your castle stormed by the...
Well, here's one for you. How come in a zombie movie, okay, zombies eat you, right? So
Theoretically.
Why are there so many zombies walking around who aren't half eaten? And how are they even able to get up when they've been eaten?
Indeed. And I always wonder how they they continue to decompose, and yet, here we are 3 years later, and there's still millions of
Why do they move at the
zombies
pace
out
of
there.
snails, but they're all wearing name tags? They were at KFC. Like
Exactly.
half of Calgary is overrun, but there's still a KFC waiting for the zombies to shuffle in. Like,
Exactly.
why?
And those are the things nobody thinks about.
Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead.
How graphic is too graphic? Other than, I know the obvious answer is, know your audience, but when is it okay to be really, really graphic, and when?
I think it's like know your story too, and if that's the tone of the story. If it pops out of nowhere, then it can either be extremely effective for its extremity, or it can be extremely, what the heck is that doing there? And throws the reader out of the story. So you got to be super careful.
In crime, sorry. Okay, ladies first. I'm a lady. Sometimes. In crime, Constantine knows me. In crime fiction, there's a very specific division. In whodunit cozies, the blood is off stage. Okay, so the real violence is off stage. Whereas in something that is noir, or in my sort of stuff, it could be on stage, when you're talking mob violence and that sort of thing. In romance, it's a very interesting thing that has happened in romance. And apologies if this offends anybody. Rape is okay in crime fiction. If you've read any of Stieg Larsson's books, you know that they are very violent. This sort of thing is quite graphic in crime fiction. It is not at all allowed in romance fiction, not even in erotica.
But as a proviso, usually in crime fiction, it's an awful, awful thing that comes with retribution later.
Yes, it's a motivator.
And
it's a
I will
motivator.
agree with that. Writing hard-boiled detective fiction, you're allowed that license to, punch somebody's teeth out, hit somebody in the back of the head with a pipe. You're expected to have those things in there. I don't know that I could write a cozy mystery because I'm an ex-boxer and I love violence.
Yeah, I
so.
think
When you're
I'm
killing
writing
zombies, extreme is actually
Exactly.
a good
So if
thing.
you love violence,
I'm not sure there is such a thing as
Zombie
killing
fiction.
a zombie in too an extreme a manner.
I'm writing police action thriller, so there is death, and in most of the cases, I describe what happened. If they're shot in the head, I describe exposed brain, bone matter, splatter on the walls, but I don't go on and on with it. So it's here, he was shot. Here's what happened, and then on to something else. So maybe at best a paragraph. And then go on. So I think it's expected, but I'm not gonna drag it out and go into lots of details.
And it's how you do it too. I would imagine yours would be much more clinical than than somebody in a back alley getting billy clubbed, right?
And let's face it. I guess the question is it that you could look at the question as based on an assumption that more is more, and a lot of times less is more.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to a gruesome murder, sometimes just very sparsely describing what you're seeing there, it can be, the reader's imagination fills a lot of it in. It can be very, very gruesome and grisly. Just little details, a couple little details. And if you describe everything, then it's kind of like, I don't know, I think you can numb the reader to it a little bit. But if you keep it stark and keep it less is more, I think it can be.
And
really
show it through the reactions of the audience, through the reactions of the people on the scene. What did they do? Did they turn away? Right. Does somebody throw up? You don't even have to show what's in front of you. Mm-hmm. Just show how people are reacting to it.
And it is, that almost killed horror in the 80s going into the 90s, right?
The splatter
it
punk.
got to the point where it was just so much about describing the gore that people just stopped reading horror at all.
Sure.
This is related to what you anticipated my question. Now, have you ever been censored
Yes.
because it's too violent, too graphic? And obviously there aren't any ratings when it comes to books. We have for movies, we have for games. Why don't we have, I'm not saying we should, I'm not saying we should, but why don't we have violence rating for books?
The reason why we don't is because it's stupid. That's why. But as far as have I ever been censored? I'm in horror, and it's just, I'll get criticized for not going. You usually get criticized for not going far enough, not going too far in horror. Horror, there's an automatic assumption you're going to break boundaries. So if you do this or that, you can do almost anything in horror.
That's an excellent question, because we have it for sex, of course. I mean, I mean, there is a real division. Yes, and there's erotica, and then there's hot romance, and then there's all sorts of different categories. Explicit sex.
But you can have sex scenes in just about any genre.
Yeah.
But
You
just
can,
maybe
but
not
I mean,
super explicit.
Yeah, it depends. Oh yes. Well, Amazon is censoring.
By category.
Yeah, they are now. They're if your book is classified.
I guess I censor myself then. I mean, I just don't go super explicit and sexy because it's not relevant to do so.
Yeah, but
and the same. Yeah,
but it's interesting that we have that for sex, but not for violence, and yet in movies it's
because
different.
sex is horrible and violence is good.
to be honest, though, a lot of that.
I'm from America. Okay. And so that's how we do things down there.
To be honest, though, a lot of that is forced by the market.
Yes.
A lot of that's categorizations that are forced by the market rather than, there's no sensory board that's saying, okay, this book gets this sticker and this book gets this sticker. And to be fair, the Amazon, they have a rating on there if you're self-publishing anyways. Like, for instance, I have an ebook single that I'd put out with spin-off characters from my book, and it's the homosexual sex performer thugs, and I'd put it up there, and I didn't think about hitting the little thing to pick the age group that it's recommended for. Oops. And then I posted it, and 10 minutes later I look, and it's charting on teen teen action or something. Run back in there and make sure it's listed as 18 plus. And so a lot of it falls to us, but at the same time it's kind of already been pushed and marginalized by the market.
Well, you were like, hey, I have a 6,000 Amazon ranking.
Yeah, I was like,
I'll give it one more hour.
Yeah. It's like, how long can I go before somebody's mother calls me?
Yeah.
It needs to be a Puritan zombie killer.
Yes.
Yeah, I would fight any type of rating system for books, and it's a great way to conclude the panel because that you would get my death scene because I'd throw my dead body in front of it. That no way do we need anything like that.
And it is much more, just like everything else in North America.
My
it's
opinion.
much more categorized sex-wise than for violence. You can have
don't read
atrocious
it.
violence in a YA book.
Yeah.
And you can probably get away with it.
I mean, the age
You
thing.
can't have any
but,
dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So does anybody have any? We're running. It's not like we're waiting for another panel, so we do have a couple more minutes. But we are concluding. Does anybody have any final thoughts?
No thoughts. No, we're all zombies.
This panel is now dead.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yay.